Hey friends, Andy here just to tell you that this episode of Lucky Paper Radio has the opportunity to be an interactive multimedia experience. In this episode, Anthony and I are both drafting the exact same seat of a pod from the Neoclassical Cube, exact same packs, same bot decisions, and we are talking about how our card evaluations and picks differed and how our drafts unfolded differently from one another. If you want to draft this exact same seed as well before you listen to us talk about it and we influence your thoughts on individual packs, we've provided instructions below for how you can do it. Basically, you're going to go download a text file from the show notes and upload that as the pre-built booster packs to Draftmancer, throw 7 bots in the pod, and then just draft as normal. I do want to make it clear you don't have to do this to enjoy the episode. I think the episode stands alone, even if you don't have time or space to go do this draft yourself. But if you do, I'd be curious to see what you come up with. So check out those instructions in the show notes. Hello! Welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony. No matter how big the dessert is, he's cutting it in half Maddox.
Hello!
Hello!
What are we doing this week? Yeah, so what you mean is not that if it's really big, but if it's really small, we got to do this, like, asymptotic dessert slicing, where there's
I'm
always
saying literally no matter how big it is.
Yeah.
If there's a sweet thing,
No.
You don't want the whole thing.
If it's a whole cake, I don't want half of the cake.
Okay, but you're... Okay. Touche.
You're saying if it's
Touche.
a
Intro bit completely dismantled by logic and reason.
Your bit was confusing. Make a more clear bit.
I thought the portions... Okay, maybe I should have said portion size.
You want to start over?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
It's better than my habit with desserts, which is that no matter how big the portions are, I'm always having
you will
two.
Eat whatever is left.
I'm always having 2, at least, or more. I'm always having N+1 dessert portions, no matter how big the portions are.
I'm not a big sweets guy, okay? Is that
it's
okay
good.
with you?
It's objectively better than being a sweets guy like me. It's better for your health.
Great, we're cursing on this one?
No, we're not.
Why
did you refer to it? Now
you have to bleep it.
I was going to cut it out, and now I have to bleep it instead of just cut it out.
Interesting energy in the studio tonight.
It's fine energy. It's normal energy. Everything's fine. What's wrong with you?
I don't know. Just computers. All day computers.
Are you anxious because of computers?
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do?
Throw them out the window.
That's right, everybody. You heard it from us. Throw your computer out the window. Unless you're listening to this podcast on it, in which case, switch that over to your phone or something. Then throw your computer out the window. We need you to not lose us. Don't turn the podcast off. It's very important. Because in this episode, we are doing one of our, I would say, famous. We've only done this once before. We have a whole episode format.
Twice before, right?
Twice before?
I think at least twice.
Maybe twice. We have not done this many times.
I wrote a lot of code to deal with this, so I hope it's...
I know. We have not done this many times. We do have
None of it works anymore.
A style of podcast where we are both, Anthony and I, drafting the same seed of a cube, and then we are going to talk about our draft and then review our finished decks and see where we diverged and what sort of decks we ended up with. It's hard, I think, to talk about cube gameplay on the podcast, Anthony, because we talk about cube design all the time. That's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to talk about something that is transportable or someone can apply to their own cube. But when you're talking about playing a cube and the strategy around it, it's all so context dependent that it's hard for us to give any advice on like what's a good pack one, pick one or whatever, like how to draft effectively.
Pack one, pick one is like the easiest place, but like how do you make a decision based on this complex game state, based on what your whole strategy was with this deck and what your opponent's doing and what your opponent did in game one? And it's really difficult, as you say.
Yeah, we can't do it without a context, and it's often hard to communicate that context. So this entire episode is dedicated to building that context, which is one specific draft where you and I are going to be presented with the same packs because we're playing against the same bots, and we're starting with the same seed, and we're going to see how our drafts differed, where our card evaluations differed, where our strategy differed, and talk about the merits of each approach and see where we ended up. As you said, Anthony, you wrote a lot of code to make this work specifically on our website. We have a cards mention page for every episode, which is already, I think, very technically impressive, where we list a visual spoiler of every single card we mentioned in chronological order. But for this episode, we're actually going to do something much more useful, which is not list the cards in chronological order as they're mentioned, but actually show our respective drafts and the card we picked out of each pack. So you can just go and basically view our drafts and see the same thing we saw when we were looking at the packs, which is also going to have the side effect, obviously, of showing you all the cards we talk about, because I doubt we'll mention a card that is not in one of these packs in this episode.
Yeah, we might not mention every card that's in every pack as well, so as long as you're not driving, that might be helpful to pull up.
Or if you are driving and you're just really good at it and you don't...
Okay. If you're the 70% of men who are above average drivers out there.
So, let me give it a little context for the Cube, and then we'll dive into our Pack 1 Pick 1, Anthony, and talk about how this draft went.
To be clear, I realize there's a way to interpret that statistic, which does imply that men are better drivers. What I mean to say is men have a bad perception of their own evaluation of their driving skills.
Yes, correct. You're not saying that 70% of men are above average drivers.
They think they are.
It is that they think they are.
And I think that's probably a low statistic
I think it's much more.
I pulled out of my ass.
I think it's 70% of all people, and it's got to be way more men, for sure. Anyway, we are talking about my Neoclassical Cube, which is a Cube project we actually don't talk about on the show that much relative to some of my other Cube projects. I think mostly because as a design exercise, I think it is very much at a sort of stable place, and it is all about old school magic, which means that out of most new sets, I'm not adding any cards to this cube, so all changes really stem from me changing my mind about something or trying to tweak an archetype rather than just new cards coming out, which is, in my opinion, where you want to be with a cube design. However, that's not to say that this cube consists of only old school cards. It does not. It is, for the most part, cards that were originally printed in Old Border, and it is their respective Old Border printings. So we're talking pre-Mirrodin, pre-8th edition. However, I have not actually held myself to that as a hard rule for the entire cube. Instead, I want that card pool to shape the different archetypes, the different decks, the different strategies that are viable in the cube, and especially shape the power outliers. But if there's a place where I think a newer card fits thematically, helps support a deck that might need a little more redundancy or a little additional sort of oomph, and doesn't sort of mess with the vibes, I don't mind running a couple new border cards. And I'm sure we will talk about a number of them in this draft because a couple of them ended up being role players, at least in my deck, and perhaps in yours as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a key way to sort of encapsulate that sort of standard that you've set for yourself is it'd be really easy to put together a bunch of old border cards and a bunch of new border cards and really feel that, like, change in the design philosophy and the fact that new border cards could just be huge creature threats that do a whole bunch and end up warping the format and being the cards that matter game to game. You really want to capture that old border feel where the gameplay is really kind of about putting multiple cards together to build a coherent strategy, and I think that the new border cards that you've chosen reflect that, and they're not just things that take over the game on their own, but still require that kind of old border put into a very specific structured strategy to make them work.
Or they're just cards that could have very feasibly been printed in Old Border, but just didn't happen to be. Like, Burst Lightning is in here. Kicker is an Old Border mechanic. It's not overpowered. It fits because it has an old school mechanic and, kind of fits the sort of power level of old school cards. So, yeah, that is often how I describe this environment in terms of what its meta looks like. There are really powerful cards, there are really powerful decks, but you don't get a power outlier that just sort of single-handedly takes over the game, right? I mean, the closest we have to that in this card pool is something like Deranged Hermit, right? That's a huge bomb in this format that puts 9 power and toughness onto the battlefield in one fell swoop, and can theoretically just carry a game on its own. By modern standards, Deranged Hermit is not very powerful. It is, much more easily answered than a lot of other threats. It doesn't have the same, power of a lot of sort of self-encapsulated threats. And it's also not the best thing you can be doing here. The best thing you can be doing here is combining Fast Bond and Time Spiral, or combining Tinker with some weird old school artifact that, doesn't actually have a lot of its own individual power level, but can work in this sort of synergistic environment.
Tinker with Phyrexian Colossus, and also make sure you have a Voltaic key in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So there can be very powerful decks, but there's also a degree of jankiness, which is, I think, key to the identity of old school Magic. Other things that I think are key in old school Magic is that the creatures pound for pound here are not great. They are definitely not the best cards in the cube, and by virtue of that fact, there are definitely a number of creatureless or creature-light decks, or at least decks that don't really care about their creatures, which is not really true of modern Magic. If you think about, a board wipe in a control deck, or just an efficient creature removal spell, those cards are just extremely high picks, very main deckable in basically every single modern cube environment, because creatures are a given. Here, I'm not necessarily happy to main deck my 3rd or 4th creature removal spell, even if it's efficient, because it's entirely possible that 2 of my 3 opponents might not actually care about their creatures or have any in their deck at all, which is an important thing to the meta. Burn is present here, and the sort of control decks often use Milv's win condition. They'll draw you out with a Stroke of Genius. That's an important meta thing to understand here. There's also an artifact deck that has Mishra's Workshop, has some sort of stacks effects, so you should be prepared for some symmetrical taxing or otherwise game slowing down effects that you have to be prepared to play against. Other than that, I don't think it varies too much from what people might expect when you hear old school Magic. Is there anything else you think needs to be said about the texture and the nature of this cube, Anthony? You've played it a number of times at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some other like little nuanced details about old school Magic that you've preserved, like some amount of color hate, which I know you've evolved a little bit on how you're approaching that.
There's no color hate right now.
There's no color hate currently. Okay. There's also Reanimator, I think, is a reasonably loud theme, as well as goblins. Is that the only creature type that really matters?
Yeah, I would say goblins matters, and then white creatures matters.
Sure.
There's things that pay off for having a bunch of like white weenie creatures in your deck.
But yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
Maybe another way to put it is Vinny played this cube for the first time last Tuesday, and Vinny doesn't have as much knowledge of the old school card pool. I think he's been playing for a long time, but I think did not play as a kid and maybe has only played, formats that were relatively contemporary. And he was struck specifically by the fact that a lot of these cards on their face don't really do anything, and you kind of have to know specific interactions about them, which I know is the thing you often dislike about cube environments, but it's just a fact of what's going on here, right? Like, Mind Over Matter is a great example of that. That's a 6-mana, 4 blue pip enchantment that says discard a card to tap or untap an artifact, creature, or land. And it's like, that is probably the most difficult card in the entire cube to cast, realistically, and you have to then turn cards, which are, fundamentally we're taught in Magic, like a very important resource, like cards in hand is so valuable, and you're turning that into just a like temporary effect to either tap or untap something. Like, how could that be good? But if you have played with this card in formats where it is playable, you know that it's actually a combo card that can be combined with a number of things to draw your entire deck, make an arbitrarily large amount of mana, and then just fireball your opponent or draw them out. So it's actually a sort of potent combo piece that also has a lot of other weird synergies. On Tuesday, I was playing this cube, and I didn't have Mind Over Matter in my main deck because I was mostly a like Goblin Welder style deck, and I do think that Goblin Welder Mind Over Matter can be really cool if you have the sort of right pieces.
Yeah, and I honestly, your 6 mana with 4 blue pips discard outlet is really, really important there.
Well, it also untaps your Goblin Welder,
right? That's true,
which is very cool. So that deck actually, I think, does have legs, but truthfully, I didn't really have the like combo pieces for Mind Over Matter or the mana to really make it work. But against one of my opponents, I sided it in because in game 1, they played Dream Halls against me, and they also had a ton of small ball removal. And so I took out the Welder package because I saw like 4 to 5 burn spells in game 1 that would kill my Welder or my Goblin Engineer. And I brought in my Mind Over Matter and a couple other spells I might be able to cast if my opponent does Dream Halls me again. And I got to do this amazing thing, which was I had a Static Orb in play and a Mind Over Matter, which I just cast, and a Squee in hand, and every turn on my opponent's end step, I would discard Squee to tap my own Static Orb, and Static Orb doesn't have its effect if it's tapped. So then I got to untap normally, return Squee to my hand during my upkeep because of Squee's trigger, and then my opponent could only untap 2 things every single turn. So like that's the kind of stuff that the cards here can do that if you are just reading them for the first time, you might not know what the heck you do with Mind Over Matter in this cube. And there's a bunch of cards sort of fit in that category of like, what am I doing with this card here? What is the sort of purpose of it? That does come down to individual card interactions, for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned that's not necessarily the kind of Magic that I most enjoy, and that's true. And I think I struggle especially in cubes that are like, this is the 100% combo cube. Like, everything is a combo. You kind of just have to know what you're doing. But the games are slow enough here, and the decks are janky enough. Maybe there's a better word for that, but like the decks are not super refined. It's not like you're always hitting your combo on turn 3 or turn 4 or even turn 6. So I think there are also plenty of opportunities just to draft like a reasonably fair green deck, and having both of those together in an environment feels very cohesive, honestly.
Yeah, and we talked about this a lot actually in our episode about the texture of combo in Cube, and so I'll refer people back to that if they want to hear more about that. But this is one of the environments where I'm really pleased with how the combo decks play with the fair decks. And so to your point, yes, the Degenerate Microcube, you really had to know all of the combos to draft an even functional deck in that cube, whereas here, there's a ton of fair stuff to do alongside some of these weirder, more nuanced, unfair things. With that pretext, should we jump into our respective drafts?
Let's do it.
How do you want to do this? Do you think we should go through like your entire draft, then my entire draft, or do you think we should take it pack by pack?
I think we should start pack by pack because I wonder if we're going to start in a similar direction here.
I was going to say the same thing. Just to pull back the curtain a little, we actually had a first draft we had done with a different seed.
We did a test draft of the draft.
We did a test draft where we got kind of messed up and we couldn't get the data out of it we needed to actually populate our cards mentioned page that Anthony's built. So we ended up doing a second one. The first seed, I felt from pack 1, there was like 4 or 5 very justifiable first picks, and I was like, it's entirely possible Anthony and I will start this draft going completely different directions and never our paths shall cross, which would have maybe made for an interesting conversation, but probably less interesting than this one, which I do think the first few picks I was definitely thinking, well, I feel like Anthony's going to take these same cards. So
yeah, well, okay, what did you take in the first one? Because I remember there was both Kiki Jiki, there was Living Death, there was Voltaic Key and Grim Monolith in the same pack, and also Earthcraft and Deranged Hermit. There were like all those cards that I was interested in.
Yeah, just to be clear, you're talking about the draft we did not. We're not talking about.
We're not talking about that draft. We're going to talk about it a little bit.
This is a draft we did not do. I ended up taking Grim Monolith out of that pack.
I took Grim Monolith too.
I was like, these are all really powerful cards. Grim Monolith is more flexible and goes in more decks.
Yeah.
Than some of the other cards do.
But to the point about like my draft style, I feel like that really affects less the way that I play and more the way that I draft, because I feel like I draft very conservatively. And what I really regretted after taking that Grim Monolith, which I was thinking like, this is super powerful, maybe I wheel that Voltaic Key. And then I was just like, why didn't I just take the Deranged Hermit? Like that is one of the rare cards in this cube that can just win a game on its own. And
it was a weird pack because it had Grim Monolith and Voltaic Key,
right,
and also Earthcraft and Deranged Hermit. And it's not that Deranged Hermit and Earthcraft are like a combo that have to go together, but they're so good together.
Right.
Same with Grim Monolith and Voltaic Key. There's other things to do with all those cards, but those two cards are also really good together. And I had the same thought process where I was like, I'm a lot more likely to wheel Voltaic Key than Earthcraft. Like, that's just not going to happen. I also kind of felt like maybe that wasn't the right start. But we're going to this is be very confusing to listeners because we're talking about a draft that is not the draft in question. So
fair. Okay, you got to put a little chime here to
bing. That episode is lost to the ages. Let's talk about this draft, Anthony. What were you looking at out of this first pack?
Honestly, not a lot. I see a Prosperity. Wait, no. What is this card? It's a mana. It is a mana drain. Okay, I figured out what this card is thanks to the ridiculous card version.
It's crazy that Prosperity is actually a card and they printed this card frame. That's the really insane part.
This is another derailment, but come on, guys. You went too crazy with all the alt frames. Like, this card is just too hard to read. We have Mana Drain in this pack. Mana Drain is, like, obviously one of the most powerful cards ever printed. It is, interestingly, I think in this cube, not maybe as busted as it is in some other contexts, because you gotta have something to do with all that mana, but it's still very, very strong. I guess Arc Lightning is also pretty good here as a way to remove multiple creatures, and then we have a bunch of lands. Is there anything else that's really catching your eye?
No, I mean, I think Mana Drain is a solid tier or two above the rest of his pack. The rest of his pack, honestly, quite poor.
Yeah.
The Arc Lightning is fine. Fiery Temper is fine. Those are cards also that I would take more highly in other cubes, though, to be honest. Like, again, there's some decks here that just won't care about your Arc Lightning. They don't have small creatures.
Definitely,
and so it is not a foregone conclusion that Arc Lightning is going to be a fantastic card in your finished deck. I mean, it goes face, obviously, so it has a sort of fail case of being decent. The only other card I'd call out here is one that is, like, interesting, and if you wanted to force something stupid you could maybe go with, is Lake of the Dead. Lake of the Dead is a really interesting old card that allows you to, it's a land that allows you to sacrifice swamps for 4 black mana once a turn, which is an opportunity to have a crazy storm turn, to ramp out a Bolas' Citadel super early, to play a Necropotent super early. It can do some really messed up stuff, but I certainly wouldn't be taking it early over a card as flexible and generically strong as Mana Drain.
All right, so we're both on Mana Drain.
Yeah, and listener, if you're not on Mana Drain out of this pack and you feel strongly about it, I would love for you to write it and tell me why, because I can't really see a strong argument in taking anything else. On to pack 2. Here I think there's like 2 reasonable picks. Well, there's a lot of reasonable picks, but there's 2 I think that you're most likely to have taken one of the 2, and I think they both lead down the same direction, though, so kind of doesn't matter which one you took. But what are you looking at this pack?
Well, I know you love blue cantrip, so Ponder's probably catching your attention, but we also have Counterspell in this pack.
You have named the 2 cards I think you probably chose between.
I did take Verdant Force. Just kidding. I looked at the Verdant Force longingly, and then I decided to take Wild Rose Rebellion.
Stop this. I know you hate the bad printings, but it's just going to confuse people.
I decided to take Counterspell.
I also took Counterspell out of this pack. I think this is an interesting sort of pack, too, because in a vacuum, if this was my pack 1, I think I'm taking Blast from the Past, which
I think that's reasonable.
Is a really messed up burn spell from Unglued that has Madness, Cycling, Kicker, Flashback, and Buyback, but its base mode is 1 red, deal 2 damage to something, draw a card, and then you can still flash it back later for 4 mana. So it's an incredibly cracked, like, Firebolt, basically.
And you can even, like, flashback and buyback, right? You can do really weird stuff with it.
I don't believe you can flashback and buyback. Flashback, if the spell will go anywhere, it gets exiled instead. So it can't be put back in your hand. I don't believe. I could be wrong about that. You could definitely, like, kicker and buyback if you have a bunch of mana and just keep making goblins every single turn. But anyway, that, I think, is probably the highest pick. But given that I already have a really strong blue card, that makes the other blue cards, come up a little bit.
For sure.
And then it's between Ponder and Counterspell. And this is another situation where the unique context of this cube, like if this was the Bun Magic cube, which again, context is so important. It's obviously not. But these two cards are also in the Bun Magic cube. And if I took a really strong blue card in pack 1 of the Bun Magic cube, and then I was presented with Counterspell or Ponder, I would probably take the Ponder. And that's because in the Bun Magic cube, there are a ton of payoffs for casting cheap spells. There's a ton of reason to fill your graveyard with cheap cantrips for things with like Delve and other sort of, graveyard matters mechanics. And there's also like a much bigger cost to like not doing something on your turn 1 in the Bun Magic cube. Whereas here, there's a bigger sort of range in the power level of cards, and so it's more important to have your Counterspell to counter the thing, and your Ponder is really just good card selection. It doesn't have all those other sort of synergies that come with a card like Ponder in Modern Magic. So here I did take the Counterspell too, because I was like, all right, well, I already got Mana Drain. Here's another blue-blue Counterspell that means that it makes all your other Counterspells a little better, more reasons to hold up mana. And for that little nuanced reason where I otherwise would normally take Ponder over Counterspell, I took Counterspell over Ponder here just because of the unique context.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There is also another Counterspell in this pack, but it's worse than Counterspell, so we're not taking that. There's a couple cards for Reanimator, and a Priest of Titania, which is a little bit appealing. I could maybe see an argument if you're just like, look, I want to stay open and not just have two very similar cards, but I don't know. It's just too appealing to start with two very strong Counterspells.
I'm glad this is going this way because I think it'll be much more interesting to talk about our sort of nuanced distinctions in this draft rather than having us go totally different directions right out of the gate.
Yeah,
so.
I'm curious because I'm not super happy with where my deck ended up, so maybe you figured out some better ways to go.
I'm medium happy, but I was feeling pretty suspect towards like the end of pack 2, so let's see where we went. This next pack might be the first departure for us. What are you looking at out of pack 3?
All right, so notably in pack 3, we have no blue cards, so we've got some pretty good removal spells in both black and red that I'm a little bit interested in. We did just talk about some green cards, and we've got both a Noose Constrictor and a Wall of Blossoms. Also, Treetop Village may be interesting, but I went with Decree of Justice. I was thinking, we got two counter spells. If we're holding up a bunch of mana, then a way we can turn that into a win is with Decree of Justice, which you can cycle, draw a card, and make a bunch of soldiers at end of turn.
I did exactly the same thing.
I thought you might.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a huge Decree of Justice fan, and so it's not surprising I would take it here. I actually didn't know how you felt about Decree of Justice, and in this spot, I think this is another interesting sort of context bit, right? Because there's a Grim Lavamancer and a Lightning Axe in this pack, which are extremely good red spells, and again, in another cube, taking two good blue spells, I would be maybe really drawn to a Grim Lavamancer or a Lightning Axe. But in old school Magic, this sort of like blue-red Delver deck with like cheap threats that like care about casting spells just doesn't really exist. You can draft blue-red here, but it's a much more kind of controlling deck that, wants to cast its Prophetic Bolt later on, more so than a deck that's like playing something on turn 1 and then backing it up with counterspells. So the nature of the blue-red deck is just a little different and slightly less appealing to me as a player, whereas Decree of Justice to me is the number one best control win condition in this cube, and we have two really strong counterspells, and so I'm very happy to take a win condition here in Decree of Justice and just go with that.
Yeah, maybe a little bit influenced by both the experience that I've had with this cube, which is, like you say, it's like the control decks that are casting a bunch of counterspells that I've lost to are not, I'm going to put out one cheap threat and then chip in while I'm countering everything. They're more like, I'm going to counter everything you do, and then I'm going to, when I have 14 mana, cast 2 deal 10s, which are here, I guess.
Yeah, or you're just going to get to a bunch of mana and then cast Stroke of Genius and make your opponent draw
exactly.
out. Like, that's the control win conditions in this cube.
I'm a little bit over in, like, this is not the kind of deck that I'm most comfortable playing, but I know I'm starting with 2 really powerful counterspells, so that's making me willing to shift into something that's a little bit untested for me. I mean, that's kind of like, to be honest, the mindset I'm going into on a draft night. It's like, the idea of I have enough confidence now that I'm going to have something reasonable, that this isn't like, I'm not taking a card that is part of an AB combo that I have 0 experience with, so I'm likely just to have a totally dysfunctional deck, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, we're still lockstep. I think pick 4, we are going to diverge, and I think maybe in a way that means you took a better pick than I did in full retrospect.
So I'm guessing you didn't take a counterspell. So we've got a bunch of red cards, we got some burn spells, we got a Hermit Druid, which is an interesting combo thing, and then we've got Memory Lapse, which admittedly is probably not the best counterspell for the deck full of only counterspells. Maybe not. I forget.
Very good.
Okay, it's good. I took Memory Lapse.
I was between Memory Lapse and one other card, which was Yawgmoth's Will.
That makes sense. Yawgmoth's Will is probably Well, not in a vacuum. In a lot of contexts, like one of the most busted cards you could play. So
Storm is the thing here. Combo decks are a thing here. So Yawgmoth's Will does have plenty of unfair applications in this cube, and things are also slow enough that a value Yawgmoth's Will in the late game can also be totally justifiable in the right deck. But more importantly, I think in the first 4 to 6 picks of any draft, I always put myself through the lens of all right, what if I didn't take all the cards I already have? I look at the pack through both lenses, right? And here, if you hadn't taken those other cards, Yawgmoth's Will is the best pick by a wide margin, I think. It's just the most powerful card in the pack with the highest ceiling. And at this point in the draft, we know that, 3 people to the right of us didn't take Yawgmoth's Will, so they are presumably not playing the deck for it because it's the highest pick for the deck for it, which is some information. So I always take that into account. I saw the memory lapse, and I was like, this is, in some ways, the safe pick because the chances that I abandon the 2 really good blue cards that I already drafted, they're both double blue, are very low. So this memory lapse is going to make my deck almost certainly. But I opted for the sort of higher ceiling of potentially ending up in black and wanting a Yawgmoth's Will and having that as an option. Spoiler alert, ultimately I did not end up playing the Yawgmoth's Will. I didn't end up getting there at all. So I wish I had taken the memory lapse in hindsight, but obviously that's with the power of hindsight. In the moment, I was like, this opens up other options for where this draft could go. Maybe there's no white available in the rest of these packs. I'm not playing Decree of Justice, and I'm actually a blue-black Storm combo deck, right? That is a potential way this could go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and it would be cool to have some more data on this of how often in a cube draft people end up playing their first pick.
I think it's
and then
lot.
Additionally, how often people play their second, third, fourth pick. And I wonder about the value of taking those speculative third and fourth picks. I think that if I end up not playing my first pick, often I feel pretty good about it. I'm in a situation where I'm like, I let myself figure out what's open and abandon something that I could have overcommitted to that and done myself worse than I should have. Taking a speculative third pick and then being at the end of the draft being like, oh, I stuck with the first 2 colors I was in, and I could have had one more really B tier instead of this card I'm literally not playing. Can be kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and so I'm not convinced I had the right pick here. I think it's interesting that in the Cube world, you asked how often you think people don't play their first picks. I think very rarely. I think Cube, for the most part, we're talking about a much narrower power level band than Retail Limited, and you will almost never get hard punished by taking the first couple cards that look good to you and just forcing those colors and drafting a deck, right? That's just how most cubes work. It's not a good or a bad thing necessarily, but it's, I think, a profound difference from Retail Limited. Retail Limited, you could absolutely get burned by taking some bomb in a color, pack one, pick one, and then not reading the signals that color is not at all open, and just never getting a removal spell in that color or any other B or A card in that color for the rest of the draft. That can be a way you totally tank a draft in Retail Limited. I don't really think that happens in Cube because if you're not getting the A cards from that color, you're still getting the B cards, right? And there's a lot of B cards. It's a really deep sort of B section. So maybe I'm staying too open, as it were, and I should just be all right, look, I know I'm playing counter spells. Let's take the safe pick here instead of because the other thing about Yawgmoth's Will is not only is it off color, it's not like if I have black mana, I can just play Yawgmoth's Will and it'll be great, right? It needs to go in a very specific deck. It's a highly synergistic card. So perhaps a misstep of mine, but it means we're still basically drafting the same deck at this point because I have not committed to any black cards. So I'm maybe a little more open at this point in the future packs to another black power level outlier than you might be.
Yeah, other notables, just Lava Dart is here, which I think is relevant just because we passed a bunch of other burn spells. Core Skyfisher is here, and we just took a white card, but I don't think it's a white card that necessarily fits in the same deck.
Not what we currently have, no. On to pick 5. I bet we took the same thing here, which is another counterspell.
Yep.
Yeah.
This one was the one that was much harder for me. So I'm starting to see that this pack has a Seal of Cleansing, which I think is a card that fits with our other white cards and fits in a control deck. Disenchant is a very good card in this cube. We've got some lands, and I'm noticing there are a bunch of green cards. At least Gaia's Blessing, which I think fits pretty well in a blue-green controlling deck. Quirion Ranger, which maybe not as much, but Wall of Roots as well. So I'm kind of thinking about if I'm going to take a green card, maybe a Wall of Roots or Regrowth. Sorry, Regrowth is also here, which I think is quite good. But I do decide to take, again, what you're calling the safe pick of sticking with a counterspell in Forbid.
Yeah, I took Forbid too. I did not super seriously consider Seal of Cleansing. You're right that disenchant effects are very main deckable here. One of the sort of things about old school Magic is a lot of the power outliers tend to be artifacts and enchantments. They're just old enchantments that would otherwise be printed as an effect on a creature now, were just enchantments that did nothing unless you had other creatures to enable them back in the day, right? Your oppositions, your recurring nightmares, right? Those kinds of things Well, not that you can Seal of Cleansing Recurring Nightmare. That's a bad example. But your oppositions, your mind over matters.
Your opponent is allowed to cast their Recurring Nightmare and then pass the turn.
They are allowed to do that.
Or cast another spell with it in play.
But there are a lot of good enchantments and artifacts floating around, and so disenchant effects are very main deckable. But at this point, with only one card, I'm also like I consider my Decree of Justice pick also as speculative basically as my Yawgmoth's Will pick. I'm like, I know I'm playing blue. I might be playing white or black. Otherwise, I'm not committed to anything. And given that, my pick was basically between Forbid or honestly Zuran Orb, which is a weird card here. It is, I think most often, it honestly just plays the role of like a...
It says artifact.
Honestly, no. I think it most often plays the role as a sideboard card against aggro decks. A lot of the aggro decks here are not creature-based aggro. They are burn-based aggro. And there, if you gain 6 life, even at the cost of like a massive tempo hit to you in terms of how fast you can deploy spells, that might require them to draw 4 more cards before they can actually deal that last 6 damage, which can make a big difference. So I really like that as a really potent sideboard card that also has a line to be main deckable and could be main deckable in the sort of deck that will play Yawgmoth's Will, it must be mentioned. Yawgmoth's Will plus a Fast Bond plus a Zuran Orb, like that's a thing that I have done before in this cube and felt very good about. So
that's a silly little machine you built.
Yeah. Gaia's Blessing also jumped out at me a little bit here. I love Gaia's Blessing in control decks. It keeps you from ever having to mill out. For those that don't know, it's a 1 and a green sorcery. Target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from their graveyard into their library, and you draw a card. And if you happen to mill it over for any reason, it also just shuffles your graveyard back into your library. That is a genuinely good backstop against opponents who are control decks that are trying to mill you, unless they're trying to mill you out with just Stroke of Genius, in which case you're not actually milling cards, you're just drawing your deck. And so that's not going to help you there. But its main role here is as a card for a control deck to basically mean they always have really good card selection in the late game. Even if you never get to like your deck being empty. Once your deck has 10 cards in it, putting 3 of your best cards back into those 10 cards and shuffling it means that your card quality has dramatically increased. And you're also going to shuffle back the Gaia's Blessing, so you draw that again, and you get to keep kind of doing that. And getting to that point in the game is really good for those control decks. So that's what I was looking at, but I wasn't looking to speculate on a third color at this point. A fourth color, rather.
I agree. I mean, it's critical also with Gaia's Blessing that it is not card disadvantage. It does draw you that card back.
Yes.
So when you have 8 lands in play, it's like, cool, I'm spending 2 extra mana. I can still keep up counter spells and, slowly improve my card quality over the course of a long game.
Yeah, and it's not a total dead card early because, once you're at 4 mana, you can just cast it, draw a card, and then still hold your counterspell up.
And every once in a while, your opponent tries to cast Reanimate, and you get them.
Well, no, it's a sorcery.
It's a sorcery. Never mind.
But every once in a while, your opponent...
They cast an Entomb, and you get them.
Exactly, yes, which is real here, so that can definitely happen.
So with Forbid, though, how much do you value the buyback here? Because it's really expensive to discard 2 cards. Do you mostly just think of this as a cancel with every once in a while there'll be a situation where that matters?
That's very deck dependent. There are decks that really want to be discarding cards here, and so you can turn that into, if not an upside, at least a drastically decreased downside. With the picks we have so far, I'm happy to play Forbid as a cancel that has a buyback mode in the case that you're in the really late game and your 2 lands are not useful to you anymore and you'd rather just draw another cancel. And I think that's probably how it gets played most of the time.
That makes sense, yeah.
On to pick 6, I think another one where we might have diverged, and another one where perhaps I will have wished I made what pick you might make.
Interesting.
2 blue cards here. Well, 3. There's Fire Ice, kind of a blue card, and then there's Control Magic and Stroke of Genius. Suffice it to say, these are the 3 cards you're basically deciding between.
Fire Ice I was not that interested in. I was looking at Stroke of Genius and Control Magic. The other thing that just caught my eye as being a kind of crazy card to still be in here is Natural Order. Natural Order is not as busted in this cube as you might think because there's fairly limited options in terms of what big thing you're getting, but still it's like a card that it's a very unique card in this cube. So I was looking at those 3 and wondering if, based on my looking at the green cards in the last pack, if it was worth trying to switch over into green as well.
Do you think pick 6, pack 1 is too late to make such a dramatic shift? Because again, Natural Order is kind of like a Yawgmoth's Will in the sense that it's not like you can just put in your deck if you have green mana. You also need
a green creature,
a ton of cheap green creatures, and then a number of decent green creature hits to get off the top end. So is this too late to switch, you think?
I don't think it's too late to take it somewhat speculatively, but I think Control Magic is just a great card here. So if there was no blue card here that was really exciting to me, I might, but because it's specifically a very good blue card, I was not willing to make the switch over it.
And here's where my pick of Yawgmoth's Will changed my evaluation ever so slightly, because I was between Control Magic and Stroke of Genius. If I did not have Yawgmoth's Will, I probably would have just taken Control Magic. I agree it is the better of the 2 blue cards, and it's also just the better card for the control deck in general, right? We already have Decree of Justice.
It's got it right on the name.
It's true. We already have Decree of Justice. We already have one of the most rock-solid, uncounterable win conditions for control decks in the entire cube.
Yeah, that's another good point about Decree of Justice.
The
cycling mode is
uncounterable, so unless it gets duressed or something, you're going to get to do your Decree of Justice eventually. Given that we already have that, the Stroke of Genius, which is also a control win condition, and one that I do rank quite highly, I do rank a little more lowly, given that we already have one of the really good control win conditions. And it's worth noting that Stroke of Genius, there's a functionally very similar card, Brain Geyser, in the cube, so it's not to say we couldn't get Brain Geyser in the future if we don't take Stroke of Genius now, whereas Control Magic is singular. There is no card quite like it. However, and again, maybe a misstep of mine, a slight misstep, I was like, I do have Yawgmoth's Will speculatively, and again, the Stroke of Genius is a card that might go in a Yawgmoth's Will deck that could be a huge, important card, right? Again, if I end up with a fast bond, if I end up with ways to make a bunch of mana, a bunch of rituals, a way to storm off, a big X draw spell, could be a win condition, or it could also be a way to keep drawing more storm cards for my storm deck. So that's why I ended up taking the Stroke of Genius. It's worth noting that if Stroke of Genius was not also still very good in the control deck, I probably wouldn't have taken it, right? It's not as good as Control Magic, but even if we don't end up using the Yawgmoth's Will, the Stroke is still a playable card I'm happy to put in my deck and have it be functional.
Sure, so the baseline mode is like 4 mana, or 5 mana, you draw 3. I can't do math right now.
5 mana, draw 2 instant speed.
5 mana, draw 2 instant speed is like, it's a card.
It's fine.
And especially given the fact that it's that scalability and the upside to this can eventually be a win condition if the game goes very late or you have a huge mana.
Yeah, it's a great example of a card that goes really well with Gaia's Blessing, because you can just draw some cards in the mid-game with it and not worry about keeping it as win condition. Then late game, you can shuffle it back in when you're at the bottom of your deck and then just kill your opponent with it. So I took the Stroke of Genius here, and again, looking at where my deck ended up, I think I probably would have slightly preferred the Control Magic, maybe more than slightly preferred the Control Magic, but that was my justification at this point.
And I think that's relevant to our different approaches to drafting, that you, especially in this cube, have a much more nuanced understanding of the kind of deck that fits into, and I'm being a little bit more conservative that Control Magic is going to be reasonable in any blue deck and quite good.
Well, I would say, remember, this is a cube where a lot of decks don't have creatures.
That's a good point.
Like, Control Magic is, I would say, excellent in 2/3 of your matchups, and maybe playable in an additional, 5% of them. But there are some games you have to completely side it out, and I actually like that. I like that, you just have a very easy sideboarding strategy when your opponent's not playing creatures. You're like, well, get out of here, Control Magic. You're doing nothing for me. I still agree it is a much better card on average than Stroke of Genius in our control deck. And honestly, this might be an example of me as the cube designer next leveling myself and drafting poorly, because I'm aware of the Stroke of Genius Yawgmoth's Will deck, which maybe I should not be thinking about that at this point.
It's a risk.
Maybe as a player, I should be putting the blinders on and just being more disciplined. All right, 2 more packs before the first wheel. This next one, we both took Fact or Fiction, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, Fact or Fiction, end of turn, you lose. Seems good.
Yeah, we got to get going a little faster, and so I think we can probably skip these ones. There's other things to consider in this pack, but Fact or Fiction is I would say, a signal. A pick 7 Fact or Fiction, to me, says that there's at most one other blue drafter, probably, that maybe took one of the few cards that is in blue and better than Fact or Fiction, but this is a great sign for me. I was really thrilled to see this Fact or Fiction quite late.
Definitely. I mean, I will say again, I'm seeing a lot of green cards here and noting that, even though I'm not taking one.
Pick 8. There's not really anything for our deck. What did you take?
I decided to stick with blue and take Tradewind Rider, even though I think it's really not good for our deck. We have no other creatures yet, right? Unless we're counting the Decree of Justice, which hopefully we're already winning at that point. Some other things that are notable are maybe Unburial Rites could be a speculative pick, or maybe, I don't know, there's 3 goblins here? Is that anything? But
it's funny that Goblin Matron and Goblin Lackey are in the same pack, because it's no one's drafting goblins, and also no one should, because they're not going to get both these cards for their deck because it's too late. I took a Tradewind Rider too. I wish I had thought a little harder about this pick, because I think the other consideration is Temple Garden, which is just to say we have a good white card. Only one good white card. We have a single white card at the moment for what it's worth. But we have one white card, and this could be something that could turn on future fetches, because I agree, Tradewind Rider, even though it is in blue and therefore superficially seems like it fits, it is as unplayable in our deck right now as Goblin Matron is. It does nothing. It's a 4-mana 1/4 flyer, which is not where you want to be in this cube. So I think I should have thought a little harder, and I think maybe the Temple Garden is the correct pick, given where we're both at. But I also was just like, oh, there's one blue card left. All these other cards are not for me. Took a Tradewind Rider, maybe going a little too fast.
Totally agree.
Now, we're on the wheel, and at this point, it's worth noting that the packs are going to, in some cases, look different for us because we did take a couple different picks out of the sort of first round around the table, which is going to affect the bot picks, which could have cascading effects. So these packs might be different. We're back to the pack we opened, and for me, there was nothing even remotely playable. There was a bunch of red cards and a Sign of Darkness, and I took the Fiery Temper.
Interesting. Yeah, mine looks similar. There is also a Sheltered Thicket here, which is the red-green bicycle land. Again, I was thinking about green cards. I'm seeing a bunch of red cards here. Maybe there's some world where this ends up being for a splash, and it has cycling. If we want to have stuff to do at instant speed at our opponent's end step, that's something. But yeah, that's a very speculative pick.
Yeah, there was Cruel Turf and Sheltered Thicket in my pack too, and at that point, it's like those are two colors I'm not playing, and so I was not... Like, if that had been a two-color land where one of the colors is one of my colors, I would have taken it for sure. But I felt like none of these cards were going to make my deck no matter what. So Fiery Temper it was, and I was like, I do have Forbid. Maybe there's some world where I end up...
That's a good point.
That was the reason I chose Fiery Temper over Avalanche Riders or whatever, just because I was like, well, that's something. But I did not expect to play that card.
Okay, I forgot about this pick.
Did you wheel the Power Sink? Because I did.
I did wheel the Power Sink.
Did you now take Verdant Force?
I now took Verdant Force.
You're a sick man.
Look, it's a control win condition. I'm just going to spend 8 mana after I've counted all your stuff and have a Verdant Force, and I'm going to feel good about it.
Okay.
Power Sink maybe is the right choice, but again, I've been saying green seems open at this table, and this seems like the time I'm going to make the switch.
I took the Power Sink. I think it's a very good 2-mana counterspell, and up it scales as the game goes on. The other card I looked at here, again, still having this Yawgmoth's Will that is like speculatively tempting me from the sideboard, is Decree of Pain. Decree of Pain is, I think, a quite good board wipe to still be in the pack at this point in the game, and it also plays nicely with the Decree of Justice. I could imagine maybe a sort of Esper standstill deck where I've got a bunch of cyclers and I can do stuff without having to cast spells. Like I saw that sort of Spectre, but given that I had already taken the speculative Yawgmoth's Will, I was like, I can't afford another speculative pick. I need to just take the card I know I'm going to play. At this point, I have 5 blue cards I know for sure I want a main deck, and so taking the 6th is what I did. Take the Power Sink.
That's a good point. I mean, at this point, I have the Decree of Justice, which I feel like I'm moving off of. Tradewind Rider I'm not excited about, and the Sheltered Thicket, but otherwise I'm all in blue and I'm happy with all my picks, so that is kind of what pushed me to feel okay taking a speculative pick here.
Interesting. Because in your seat, I would have been even more quickly to snap up the Power Sink, I think, but different drafters. That's why we're talking about it.
It's not just the seat, it's the sitter, as they say.
Next pack, I took a speculative Diabolic Edict. Again, maybe I'll end up playing some black cards.
I took a Wall of Blossoms. Let's just lean into these little green guys.
Okay, so you're starting to go towards green. I have not touched the stuff, and I'm still taking some black cards that maybe will make my deck. Did you still have Treetop Village in the pack?
Treetop Village was still in the pack. How do you feel about that in a controlling deck? Because I think it was close for me between those two.
I feel so great about it in a controlling deck, and I think if it were me, I would probably have taken the Treetop Village. And here's the reason why, is that if you end up in a controlling deck with some green as a splash, Wall of Blossoms is a much harder splash than Treetop Village, because the Treetop Village in the control deck, you're not actually activating it until a very late game anyway.
That's a great point, yeah.
So it's basically, an 8-drop as far as splashing is concerned. The Wall of Blossoms, you really want to play on turn 2. That's when it's really good. And so I would probably have leaned Treetop Village over Wall of Blossoms, but that's a really small edge, I think. Did you have anything out of pick 12 that mattered for you?
Nope, I took a Life Death. There was also a Hermit Druid, but I don't think that's doing anything for me. But this this pick 13, we've got 3 green cards left. The Gaia's Blessing, the Wall of Roots, and the Regrowth that we were talking about. So now I'm feeling good about my seeing a little bit of a signal and switching into green. I was a little torn between these because I had the Wall of Blossoms. I took the Wall of Roots, and, well, more because I had the Verdant Force and thinking maybe a little bit of ramp and a card with a big butt is going to be helpful for me.
I took the Gaia's Blessing and was happy about it, and maybe actually planning to play it, because that is a card I will splash with very few green sources, because, again, it matters most in the late game, and it does fit with a sort of control strategy. So I took that, and then another card that ended up shaping my draft, pick 14, Serra's Sanctum, I got on the wheel. Did you also see Serra's Sanctum?
I did not. A crop rotation came back, which does nothing for me now, but I'll take a green card. There's also Tarfire.
Okay, so here's where our paths diverge a little bit, because I got the Serra's Sanctum and was like, okay, this is a card that is built around, but I'm only 1 pack deep. I currently have no enchantments, but it's entirely possible to end up with a playable number of them, and that card can be quite good if I intend to play this Decree of Justice. So I took the Serra's Sanctum and was also like, perhaps a speculative playable.
Interesting. So
Did you get the Seal of Primordium last?
It was a Reclamation Sage, which is actually maybe even better if I've got my Tradewind Rider and Wall of Blossoms and Reclamation Sage.
Okay, interesting.
Maybe something's happening here.
I got the Seal and was like, I just took Sarah's Sanctum. I feel pretty okay about that.
Interesting.
So I'm now thinking, am I going to go a sort of Enchantress deck, which is a real deck here for sure that is quite strong, but that's still pretty speculative. It's still like I only have like a couple cards for it. I have to see some other cards as payoffs and kind of decide to go that direction. Let's get into pack 2, and we'll have to take us a little more quickly, I think. Here, for me, I was considering Preordain, Brushland for my new, potentially Bant deck, and Time Warp, and Eternal Dragon and Memory Jar, and Exalted Angel. I was considering quite a few cards. I took Preordain because I felt like I had enough top end, and all these other cards were sort of top end effects.
Yeah, that's fair. I was kind of between Time Warp and Daze. Time Warp is not a card that, I don't know, I feel super confident about how it plays in this particular format, unless you're doing sort of like Time's Power, really busted, fast bond stuff. I think Daze is quite good, and I kind of almost wish I had taken that, but I knew I didn't have much at my top end so far. Well, that's not totally fair to say, but I took a Time Warp. We'll see what happens.
I think it is much better if you end up being a less controlling deck and a more like green-blue mid-range deck, which decks
is likely for me to do.
and those decks can play a lot of counterspells still. Like, it's not like you can't play counterspells in those decks. You definitely can. So I think that's totally justifiable. But I took the Preordain because I'm me, I guess. This second pick of pack 2 is where I had to make a decision. So here we see nothing incredible in terms of blue cards, in terms of blue control cards. We have like a Manowar, a Transmute Artifact, which are not anything. It's also worth noting, these packs might also still have diverged now, because remember, those bots have now taken different cards,
That's true.
These picks could be diverging slightly. I was looking at the blue cards, was like, all right, there's nothing here for my deck. There's a Pacifism, which I would play in my Enchantress deck, but there's also Enchantress's Presence, which is the reason to be an Enchantress deck. And I took a look at the cards I had in my pool and said to myself, this draft is maybe not going super hot, and a way that I could possibly change things up is by taking Enchantress's Presence and wheeling either Pacifism or Ground Seal. And that's what I did. I took Enchantress's Presence and said, I'm going to try and do this. I'm going to try and do the Enchantment deck.
That makes sense. I mean, I was looking mostly at Manowar, Simic Growth Chamber, and Symbiotic Worm because it's a big green guy. I didn't really see myself doing the Enchantress thing along with counterspells. Maybe that's a thing that I'm undervaluing because, I mean, to your point, yeah, there are a bunch of seals and things that play well there, but I ended up taking the Symbiotic Worm, which I regret a little bit, but I was too taken by the big green boys.
I think in your seat, I take the Manowar for sure, with like Traben Rider and like other reasons to have like reasonable cheap creatures. You also have a Reclamation Sage you can pick up with your own Manowar. I think I would take that at that point. You also already have a Verdant Force, so like, do you need both? And you're not getting Astral Order. So
I know. I didn't even put both of these cards in my build. This was a mistake.
For all those reasons, I would probably take the Manowar. I will say that I don't think you can be... I've never seen and can't imagine a deck that is both counterspells and enchantments matter and a creature-heavy deck. That seems like too many ways to spread yourself too thin.
There are no enchantment creatures here, or maybe one or two in some.
There are none. But it is very possible to be a control deck that has a big Enchantress theme. There is things like Humility in this cube. There are a bunch of other enchantments. We saw Planar Cleansing pass us by in pack 1, which is a board wipe that also happens to be an enchantment. Being a like Enchantress control deck, which is what I'm now looking at, is definitely completely viable. Next up, I took a Deep Analysis as a generically strong blue card. Did you do the same?
Deep Analysis. Is there even one in this pack for me? Oh, there is. It's way down there. I did not. I think I was between Deep Analysis and Llanowar Elves, but feeling like I was pretty confident about staying on green, being ahead on mana. I think that tempo advantage is actually really, really important, and I don't have a ton of 1-drops. I don't have any 1-drops I'm excited to play right now, so that's where I went.
Yeah, if you're committed to playing green and being a Tradewind Rider deck at this point, I can see the argument for Llanowar Elves. I do just love Deep Analysis, so I think a reasonable departure for us given our different strategies. Then I get a Flooded Strand. You get a Flooded Strand too?
Yes. There was also an opposition I was interested in, and it's definitely more appealing at this point to me than you, but I still feel pretty creature light, so I ended up taking the fixing. And I also have no fixing at this point.
Interesting. I think in your seat, I'm taking the opposition, probably. I looked at the opposition and was like, that's one of the best cards in this cube. I do have a Decree of Justice, but I am not a deck that otherwise can use opposition, so I took the Flooded Strand. But in your seat, I think opposition is maybe a big enough power outlier, and given you where you're headed, right? Like,
sure.
Like, you don't have enough creatures right now, but if you're planning to play this like blue-green creature deck, you will have a bunch, hopefully, by the time the draft is over. Otherwise, something has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah. It's close, but I also have no fixing at this point.
Yeah. It's worth noting, I think the bots on Draftmancer prioritize fixing more highly than the bots on Cube Cobra do, and I think that's correct. I think they're prioritizing it correctly. We've seen almost no fixing that's even close to our colors, so I took the fixing land as well. Did you get a Marsh Flats next?
No, I actually took the Scalding Tarn because I was still confidently blue. Both of them were still in the pack for me, but you're playing... Oh, was there not a Scalding Tarn?
I had no Scalding Tarn as an option.
Interesting. Well, I got an upgrade.
Yeah, I would prefer the blue fetch, but I took the white one because I didn't have a Scalding Tarn.
There was also a Syncopate and a Fauna Shaman here, but again, I'm prioritizing fixing at this point.
Did you have Call the Herd available to you?
No.
Okay, see, Call the Herd was in my pack and would have been a great pick for your deck. Not above a fetch land, certainly, but would have definitely jumped out. Then on to pick 6 of pack 2, tons of great blue cards.
This was the most difficult pick.
I'm assuming based on what you were saying that you also had Deranged Hermit in your pack still.
I had Deranged Hermit, I had Force of Will, Arcanus, Portent, Attunement, I don't know so much about. Birds of Paradise, again, like I think a 1 mana Birds of Paradise would have been great in my deck.
Okay, see, I didn't have Birds of Paradise or Attunement, but I had Personal Tutor, Arcanus, Portent, Force of Will, Overgrowth were the cards I was looking at. And I was thinking, man, if I had taken that opposition, I would for sure be slamming this Deranged Hermit, even though I'm currently not a creature deck.
Same.
But I did not take the opposition, and so I stuck with blue and took the Force of Will, which I think is the best card for my deck. If I didn't already have 2 control win conditions in Decree of Justice, and remember, I also have the Stroke of Genius, I would have maybe considered Arcanus, but Force of Will for me.
Yeah, I took the Force of Will as well, and I think it's a really tough pick. I'm not sure it was the right choice.
I would have put you on Deranged Hermit in this spot. How many green cards do you have that you're planning to main deck at this point?
Let's say 5 at this point, assuming I'm not going to play both of the 8 mana huge creatures.
Dang. Yeah, like that. Yeah, it's crazy to me that you took Verdant Force over Power Sink and then Force of Will over Deranged Hermit.
I mean, Force of Will is a very different counterspell than Power Sink, right? Isn't it?
It's very different, but also, I think in terms of raw power level, I think Deranged Hermit is maybe the best green card in the cube. And Force of Will is like a very good counterspell.
All right, can I change my pick?
Unfortunately,
no. You do not have to twist my arm very hard.
Unfortunately, no.
Play a Deranged Hermit.
We're both on Force of Will, apparently. I get a Hallowed Fountain from my deck. You're not going to take a white-blue duel, presumably, or did you?
I did not, but I did take a Sylvan Library.
No Sylvan
Which is interesting. That's okay. You didn't have the option.
No Sylvan Library in my pack. I probably would have taken that because the Hallowed Fountain is not the. There's a Tundra in this cube, so I would have been like, hopefully I'll get the Tundra if I don't take the Hallowed Fountain right now. I might have been tempted to take a Sylvan Library, but it was not an option for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited to get the Sylvan Library specifically because I have a bunch of 1-for-1 counters. I don't have a lot of sources of card advantage except for Fact or Fiction or Control Magic or, assembling some combination of things. So that seems very strong here. There was also a Savannah, which could be relevant for me, or Seal of Removal, which presumably is not worth it for you.
Well, those 2 cards, this was actually a really hard pick for me between Seal of Removal, Savannah, and Hallowed Fountain. I obviously had the most blue cards, and so I took the Hallowed Fountain despite being a slightly less appealing land than Savannah on this sort of, natural duel versus the sort of shock dichotomy. I felt it was more important to have fetchable blue. In the future of this draft, I will end up getting a Tundra, and I will not end up getting a green fetchable. So this is, in hindsight, my worst draft pick. If I had taken this Savannah, my mana base would have been so much better. But I took the Hallowed Fountain, and Seal of Removal is a great card in my deck. A really great card in my deck. It buys time. It's a 1 mana enchantment to trigger my Enchantress's Presence. It's a thing to do on turn 1, which a lot of these decks don't have a lot of things to do on turn 1, so you can just, put this unsummoned on the deck for future use. But I certainly didn't feel like I could take it over a premium fixing, and I was hoping to wheel it. But I was definitely looking at those 3 cards and thinking, dang, this is a good pack for me, and I only get to take one of these right now.
This is a helpful exercise to go back and look at your own deck. Like, obviously, we're doing this for content, but...
No, it's really helpful.
I'm learning a lot about the mistakes that I made, which are maybe...
Probably a pattern.
Unforced errors.
Yeah, and in my case, definitely a pattern too.
And here was a big one for me, where there was a Yavimaya Coast, and my fixing, I have 2 fetch lands, but no dual lands in green-blue. There is a Yavimaya Coast, which I'm thinking, this is kind of a subpar dual land, and I'm hoping for things that I can get with my multiple fetch lands. But there was also a Wasteland, and I got pulled into thinking, well, this is a unique type of interaction that my deck is not going to otherwise get. So I ended up taking the Wasteland over it.
I was also tortured, not by Wasteland, because I value that less in a control deck than I do in most other types of decks, but I was between Balance and Standstill, and really honestly agonizing over it. And again, I think I made a mistake here. I think I should have taken Balance. My logic at the time was I am kind of getting committed to this Enchantress deck in that I have Sarah's Sanctum, and I took Enchantress Presence relatively highly, but I have 2 enchantments, and we're halfway through pack 2, and I was like, I need more enchantments.
Oh, yes. That's pretty light.
I also have Decree of Justice, which is a fantastic thing to pair with Standstill because you get to make a giant board presence without having to cast a spell. Even in a deck that is not otherwise a Standstill deck, just that interaction is so powerful. If you can just play Standstill on turn 2 when there's nothing on board, your opponent says like, well, fine, I'll make you eventually break the parity. You can then just later on cycle Decree of Justice and force your opponent to play into that Standstill, which is quite powerful. And I was thinking, Balance is probably the best board wipe in the cube. It is also, honestly, even better in the Enchantress deck because you can play things like a Seal of Removal, and that just sits in play as an onboard effect that effectively is like a card in hand, but doesn't count towards Balance. Like, it is extra good in the Enchantress decks as a board wipe. But I was like, there are other board wipes available, so I will take the enchantment and the unique effect here rather than the premium board wipe. And in my finished deck, I would have preferred to have a Balance over a Standstill because, spoiler alert, I end up getting enough enchantments that is not a problem for me.
It is just really tough to judge those synergies and judge if at the end of the draft you're going to end up just in a tough spot or not.
It's really hard. And it's interesting to see the sort of small decision point mistakes that I think are clearly mistakes in hindsight that in the moment I felt like could go either way, and I think I tipped the wrong way a number of times. There's also Disenchant in this pack, which is worth noting. I do have the Seal of Primordium, and I think those effects get less valuable as they go on, but I would be happy to main deck that card as well. But we are not wheeling anything out of this pack, unfortunately. This is the last new pack of Pack 2. On the wheel, I get the Daze.
I also got the Daze, which now that, again, I'm looking at this pack, maybe the Tempo hit is not worth it in my deck. Maybe the Preordain, which is also still in this pack, would be better.
Preordain wheeled?
Yeah. There's also a Genesis, which I'm not super excited about, but I was excited to be getting these good blue cards back, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I also had an Exalted Angel I could have picked, but I am committed to being a hard control deck at this point. And it's a fine control win condition, but I already have 2, so I don't need another.
Reasonable.
Next up, I did not wheel the Pacifism, but I did wheel the Ground Seal, which is an enchantment I am more than happy to main deck in this cube. There's enough graveyard stuff that it often matters, but more importantly, it cantrips. 2 mana, enter the battlefield, draw a card, and then it says, cards and graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. I can't tell you how many times I've cast this with 1 or 2 Enchantress effects in play. It's just been like, now it's 2 mana draw 2. And it doesn't matter that it doesn't actually care about what your deck is doing. I was a little tempted by the Keldroin Outpost, which...
Yeah, that was going around as well, and I was interested in that because, again, I mean, you've got Standstill. It's really exciting there.
I do have Standstill, and one of the cards I am most hoping to get for this deck is Humility at this point. I desperately want Humility for this deck, and Keldroin Outpost also plays very, very well with Humility. But I was still a little worried about my enchantment count, so I took the Ground Seal instead.
Well, I was lucky and wheeled the Mana War, so I wasn't too punished for my bad decision.
Nice.
I think, as I'm thinking through it, maybe part of my being too enticed by, the big green creatures is I know they're just kind of rare in this cube. There aren't, it's not like a vintage cube where you're just like, oh, yeah, you want a green 5 or 6 drop? There's a billion of them.
Yeah.
There are not that many. And, yeah, in hindsight, having one huge one and then a much more castable one in Hermit Druid would have made my deck much more balanced overall. You mean. That's the one.
Yeah. Pick 11, I get an Impulse.
Also got an Impulse.
Did you have Merfolk Looter in this pack
still? Merfolk Looter was still in the pack, and Cephalid Coliseum, and something with low contrast. Chain of Vapor. Yeah, not so interested in that, but I think Impulse, as an instant speed draw spell that is going to work with the counter spells, seems pretty good.
Yeah, in your seat, I might have been tempted by Merfolk Looter because you also care about creature synergies, but...
Although I don't have a lot of stuff that cares... except for the Trade Drone Rider, which I think I honestly didn't even put in my main deck build.
Okay.
So I think the Impulse makes sense.
Now, did you wheel the Opposition?
I did not, no.
Okay, I ridiculously did.
Whoa.
And at this point, I actually fully can't play it. I still at this point
But it's an enchantment.
It is an enchantment, but I still have no creature cards in my entire deck. I have a Decree of Justice to make creatures. I have no creature cards otherwise. I took it because there's nothing in my colors otherwise and thought, well, maybe there's a chance, but just crazy that it wheeled this late. Not sure what the bots were thinking there.
Hard to say. The rest of this pack was a little light for me. I got a Bone Shredder, a Powder Keg. I did get an Arcanus near the end, and then finally ended up with the Seal of Removal, which I think you took much earlier.
No, I didn't. I wanted to wheel it, and I did wheel it.
Great.
I also got an Overgrowth in these last couple picks, which are all cards I'm probably likely to play. So on to pack 3. Our decks have diverged quite a bit. I am still a very heavy blue, splashing a little white, splashing a little green for what I imagine will be an Enchantress control deck. How would you describe your deck in the abstract?
I don't know, and here's where my confidence wanes a little bit, that I feel like I've identified green and blue as being pretty open colors. I have some strong counterspells and some strong card selection and card advantage in blue, and I have some reasonable interaction and big threats in green. I'm light on fixing, and I don't necessarily know if those two things are going to work together that well.
Well, we have an exciting third pack, but I suspect we both took Misty Rainforest.
I was an idiot.
Okay. Which of these things tempted you to get you away from Misty Rainforest? Did you take Time Spiral?
Why did I do this? I was looking at Time Spiral and I was looking at Mind Over Matter, and I had just gotten that really late Arcanus, and I was like, you know what? I'm here playing the Neoclassical Cube. I'm here to do the silly Mind Over Matter Arcanus thing, and technically there's maybe not much else it works with, but I did talk myself into a Mind Over Matter.
Okay. I mean, honestly, with Arcanus, I think that is somewhat justifiable.
I
think what you really want at this point, once you have that, is you want a permanent that taps for multiple mana. You want we already saw Gilded Lotus go, so you're not going to get that. But you want something like a Gilded Lotus or a Gaia's Cradle or a Tolarian Academy, or if you had my deck, something like a Sarah's Sanctum. Something that if you do Arcanus and draw your whole deck, you can generate enough mana to then kill your opponent with. What you also need, which is some Stroke of Genius-esque card to kill your opponent with. If you had Stroke of Genius as well, I think it's even more a reasonable pick to take the Mind Over Matter, because then you untap with Arcanus, play Mind Over Matter, draw your whole deck by discarding a card to untap Arcanus, draw 3, and you just do that, and then hopefully have enough cards to discard it and untap the lands. And honestly, Overgrowth, which is, you didn't get the Overgrowth, or did you?
I did not, no.
Overgrowth also works in that regard. Being able to make land taps for multiple mana is just good with Mind Over Matter. So I think reasonable. The Time Spiral was tempting to me just because that card is so powerful, but it's the kind of card that if I had gone further down the Yawgmoth's Will route, I would have probably taken it, but I didn't. And so I took the Fixing, which I was so happy to get because I still feel very light on Fixing.
I messed up.
I got too hyper. I got a Tundra pick too, and
nice.
Feel good about that, but then makes me really wish I had taken that Savannah a while ago.
There's absolutely nothing for me in this pack, except maybe if I took a Tundra, could I make some fetches work better? Possibly.
No Ancient Tomb for you? You're an Ancient Tomb enjoyer.
I took the Ancient Tomb because I am an Ancient Tomb enjoyer.
And you said it's not. You said nothing for me in this pack. I think it's for your deck. Do you not think so?
Sure. I mean, nothing that is like specific to my deck. I think that's just a generic card that I'm happy to put anywhere. So maybe that's the wrong way to represent that.
Pick 3. I'm curious to hear if you saw and took the Brain Geyser here, but before we get an answer to that question, I took the Oblivion Ring. It's an enchantment. It's a strong removal spell. It's a card that I'm very excited about for my deck. I did glance at Future Sight and think maybe there's a world where I want a card like that, but I just was happy for the sort of bread and butter interaction that it synergizes with the other engines that my deck is doing.
Yeah, I mean, Oblivion Ring definitely makes perfect sense for your deck, and if my mana had gone in a better way, and I was splashing white, I was definitely not going to be able to do that at this point.
I knew you weren't taking
been
that, but for you it's between Earthcraft and Brain Geyser, I imagine?
Yeah, Earthcraft, Brain Geyser. I also am a Future Sight enjoyer, so I looked at that. I think I just don't have enough creatures to make Earthcraft really appealing yet, so I did take the Brain Geyser as another sort of outlet for trying to ramp a little bit.
So you have a combo now. Like, your deck just has a combo to win the game if you have Arcanus in play and resolve Mind Over Matter. It requires you resolving 2 6-drops and not having either of them removed, but it exists. You can theoretically do it. It's also worth noting that once you have resolved the Mind Over Matter, a disenchant will not actually disrupt the combo. You can, in response to the disenchant, go off and draw your deck and make a bunch of mana, and then let it resolve. To be
clear, Mind Over Matter can untap my land, so I draw 3 with Arcanus, discard 1 to untap Arcanus, so I'm going up in cards, and then I dump those cards in order to make mana by untapping a land, and then cast the Brain Geyser, drain my opponent of all their cards.
Correct. That is the combo.
Great combo. Love it.
That's what I would pick if I were you too, for sure. The next pack has, I would think, nothing for me. I took the Icy Manipulator. I could have taken an Auramancer, which, if I'd taken the Parallax Wave out of pack 1, or out of the first pack of the third pack, I would have taken Auramancer for sure, but I currently have no creatures in my deck and no enchantments that are naturally going to the graveyard except for Seal of Removal. So I took the Icy Manipulator, and honestly, I probably shouldn't have. I probably should have just taken an Upheaval or something. I don't know. What would you take here?
So what you're saying is I should have taken a Grim Monolith.
Honestly, yes.
Yeah.
You should take a Grim Monolith, because that is exactly the kind of thing you want with Mind Over Matter.
That makes sense. Well, I messed up again. I took the Intuition.
Oh, no. Oh,
no. Oops.
Yeah, that would be a great Mind Over Matter card, the Grim Monolith. It doesn't really ramp out the Mind Over Matter because it only costs 2 generic mana. It costs 4 blue.
Right. But in a pinch, I can also ramp out some of my other big green things.
Yeah. I guess there's an argument here that I could have also taken Kataki War's Wage as a dedicated sideboard card. It's an anti-artifact card that I would never main deck, but I could bring in against the artifact deck and be very happy about. Honestly, that's probably what I should have picked in hindsight, because I don't think any of these other cards are making my main deck, and that is by far the best sideboard card. Then I mercifully get a Wrath of God, but it's in a pack with Argothian Enchantress.
Tough. It's a tough spot.
I thought about this pick for so long, and I thought, I wish I had taken that balance. This Argothian Enchantress would be a Windmill Slam if I had taken that balance instead. I took the Wrath of God and thought, there's a chance the Enchantress wheels. I have the Enchantress's presence. Green's been pretty open. It's a synergistic card, but I needed board wipe. I needed ways to deal with creatures. I had so few ways to deal with creatures.
How long would you say you thought about this pick?
A while.
Because I just want to say, I forgot to turn
90 seconds?
I forgot to turn off the timer.
Oh, no! You got to turn the timer off.
So I thought about this pick for maybe 6 seconds. I'm just seeding that as a context.
Okay. I mean, you have more than 6 seconds at pick 5. You probably have 45.
Yeah, I probably didn't take more than 6 seconds.
What'd you take?
I took Mana Leak.
Ooh, I don't have Mana Leak in my pack. I would love a Mana Leak.
Good. This is just like blue and green cards with also the Wrath of God. And could have taken a Wild Mongrel. I don't know what Seedborn Music... I do know exactly what Seedborn Music does for me.
It's a really good card with the Grim Monolith if you had taken that. And it works in the Mind Over Matter deck because that deck has a lot of things you want to untap. And so
that's
untapping
true.
your stuff.
I did just take the Mana Leak. Seems safe.
And after thinking really hard about whether I want a board wipe or a singularly irreplaceable engine piece and taking the board wipe, I get handed another board wipe in route.
You'll love to see it. I saw the route. I also spent a lot of my 6 seconds zooming in on my screen to figure out what one of these unreadable cards is, and ended up taking a Stomping Ground just because it was literally a way to make some of my fetches work, and I've just backed myself into a corner with fixing at this point, which is frustrating, but it happens.
I was between Route and Negate, and also somewhat Absorb, though I expected I might wheel Absorb, and I ended up being right. I did wheel that Absorb. I think in hindsight I probably should have taken the Negate, but that's because I also ended up getting more ways to deal with creatures, but I didn't know I was going to at this point. I took the Route thinking a second board wipe is exactly what I want, and the Negate is very strong, but much more replaceable than another board wipe. Replaceable, in fact, by the Absorb in this exact pack, which I ended up wheeling. Pick 7, I snag a Faith's Fetters for my deck. Great Oblivion Ring variant, essentially, that also gains some life and can turn off lands in certain circumstances, which is kind of cool. I saw the Fairy Conclave and was like, I'd love that for my deck too, but I really need more removal, and so I took the Faith's Fetters.
I took a Fairy Conclave, there's also a Gush, and those are the only things I was really considering here.
Then, it all happens for me,
Oh
Anthony.
my god, a Humility?
Can
it be?
Pack 3, pick 8, I do in fact get the Humility, and this is a stroke of incredible luck, which I can't be mad about, except I am going to be mad about it, because Mobilization is in the exact same pack, which is such a good combination. Those two cards together in my deck with Sarah's Sanctum would have been incredible.
And you were one pack away from potentially wheeling one of them.
Exactly. It is in the last pack that I literally can't possibly wheel either of them. There's also a Wild Growth, which I would pretty happily play, but the Humility is incredible here. For those that don't know, Humility is a 4-mana enchantment, 2 white that says all creatures lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1, which is... First of all, a very complicated card that Bones gets mad at me for all the time. Second of all...
That's the most important thing about the card.
Second of all, a really, really powerful board wipe-esque effect. And obviously it does not actually remove the creatures, and if they have a go-wide strategy, it might not even reduce their power that much. But compared to other board wipes, it also just stays on board and affects all future plays as well, which is, I think, a very powerful part of it, and worth trading off the actual removal effect of a regular board wipe. So the Humility here was an easy pick for me, and exactly what I wanted for my deck all along. And I'm just sad I can't get Mobilization.
It's a tough spot. I'm also in a tough spot seeing that this was the last pick. I could have seen either a Breeding Pool or a Tropical Island, which another interesting thing about being able to go back and review the draft is I never saw. I did pass a Misty Rainforest and 2 non-fetchable duels, but that's a bummer.
Yeah, but I never saw those cards either. And also, I'm playing Bant, so I would have wanted those cards too.
Yeah. Sometimes you think you're eating your vegetables and you're not.
Or you are, and there's not that many vegetables on the menu.
Yeah, that's a more accurate description. There is a Morphling, which I think is a totally reasonable card for my deck that is playing blue and playing creatures.
No Morphling in my pack, so the packs are pretty different now. Back to our wheel. There's nothing here for me. I took Tormod's Crypt as a really strong sideboard card. This is kind of like Kataki in that it's like, I'm not going to main deck this for sure, but against some decks, I'll be really happy to have it. Worth noting in my pack, the Might Over Matter did wheel, which maybe is going to be disappointing for you to hear.
Slightly disappointing. The Time Spiral also did wheel for me.
Whoa! I did not wheel in my pack. What the heck?
Who can say? I ended up just taking Oath of Druids here because nothing else was really appealing, and I think that maybe there's a sideboard plan against somebody that's going wide, and I just bring in more of the big stuff and see what happens.
If I wheeled Oath of Druids, I would have taken that for sure. I have no creatures in my entire pool.
That would be much better in your deck, yeah.
No creatures in my entire pool, but I do have Gaia's Blessing, and I have no creatures, so I can find any creature remaining, and that can be my one of a druid's target. And then also just milling yourself with Gaia's Blessing in your deck is fine. If it's in hand, you're happy to mill yourself because you can just shuffle your best cards back in. And if you mill it over, then you just obviously shuffle everything back in. So I would have taken Oath for sure and been very excited about it, but did not wheel in my pack, so I'm on a Tormod script.
Rest of this pack, I can summarize and say I got a Negate. Maybe a Jilt that I could splash if I want.
My remaining picks were somewhat viable. I got the Tithe on the wheel, which I expected maybe to play. I saw the Future Sight, but I did not want another 5-mana spell in my deck at this point. I also got the Armancer on the wheel, which I think I'll bring in out of the sideboard occasionally when my opponents have disenchants. Most importantly, pack 3, pick 13, I did get Argothian Enchantress, which makes sense, honestly. Like, it's honestly, I think, a testament to the bots. I have all the enchantment payoffs. Yeah. Like, nobody else should want this card. So it's reasonable that I got it on the wheel, but it's so good in my deck that it's a really good late pickup. I also got that Absorb on the wheel, too, which was pretty good. So we'll also post our deck builds in the Cards Mentioned page so people can go and look at how we build our decks. But tell me about how you feel about your deck in the end.
I feel kind of medium about it. I feel like I've got some reasonable threats in things like the Verdant Force or Symbiotic Worm, whichever I want to run, some card advantage with Control Magic or Fact or Fiction, and Sylvan Library as well. So like I have a number of powerful cards here and a bunch of good counterspells. The big limitation here is the mana. I have 2 fetch lands, which don't really work, and I also have a Wasteland and an Ancient Tomb, which I want to play, but I mean, the really, really difficult thing is I have Mana Drain and Counterspell, which I want double blue up very early to be able to play, but also heavy pip green spells. So I think that this is going to be a deck that will sometimes curve out well and feel very solid, and sometimes just not function. And yeah, I mean, I think that maybe for me in the seat, there were just not a lot of vegetables to be had.
I think I feel a little more optimistic about my deck than you feel about yours. My mana is better. I have Tundra and Howlin' Fountain and 3 fetches for it. Where my mana is not good is for green. I have no fetchable green sources, and I only have a Misty Rainforest that also can get a green source in a forest. So my main deck building constraint was, what are the green cards that I really want to play, and what are the ones that I can't afford to? I ended up cutting the Overgrowth as a green card that I just couldn't afford, even though I would be very happy to play an enchantment that ramps here because of my 2 Enchantress effects. I also ended up cutting the Gaia's Blessing as a main deck card. I could see bringing that in out of the sideboard when my opponent is equally controlling, but I think I have enough main deck tools here in the Stroke of Genius and Decree of Justice to end the game summarily with the first time through my deck and not need to go through multiple times. The green cards I did end up playing are Argothian Enchantress and Enchantress's Presence. Now, both those cards you need to play early. That is, you want to play them before your other enchantments. That's the whole thing. And so this is where my mana is kind of sketchy because I do need to hit green to play those cards. The other green cards are Seal of Primordium and Ground Seal. Those are ones I'm happy to play later, so I'm not as worried about those in terms of my mana fixing. And the rest of my deck is a very solid blue-white control deck. I have Humility, I main decked Wrath of God, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 counterspells, and an Oblivion Ring and a Faith's Fetters to deal with other permanents in play. I think the control aspect of my deck really got there, and every once in a while the Enchantress aspect will be a really strong engine that will actually help it hum. But I think, honestly, the way this deck will mostly play is as a control deck. I will try and just buy time, wipe the board, and honestly hold back on my enchantments if I can until I have time to cast my Argothian Enchantress or Enchantress's Presence and then start turning them into card advantage. I'm reasonably happy with this deck. My biggest regrets in hindsight are not taking the Savannah. That was a huge blow to this mana base. If I had that Savannah, all of my fetches would have also gotten green, and my mana would be so much better. The Hallowed Fountain is honestly not even necessary. I already have a Tundra, so the Hallowed Fountain is fine. I'll play it, obviously, but it's a barely playable card compared to a Savannah. That's a huge sort of miss. I wish I'd taken the Negate over the Route, because I'm not main decking the Route now that I have Wrath of God and Humility. I think 2 board wipes is enough in a cube where, again, creatures are not what every deck cares about, so that was a miss. I wish I had taken the Kataki over the Icy Manipulator. Neither cards I'm playing main deck, but Kataki's a much better sideboard card. And I'm sure there are other misses that I talked about along the way. Like, yeah, I could have a Memory Lapse over a Yawgmoth's Will, but that one I feel less bad about because it was so early and I was being speculative. But I feel good with where I ended up, mostly. The lack of fetchable green mana is by far the biggest hole in this deck.
Yeah, it's interesting how we ended up in similar colors, but I think very, very different strategies.
Yeah, for sure. I still have no creature cards in my whole deck. I'm sorry, Argothian Enchantress.
That counts.
Argothian Enchantress, Oath of Druids is such a great combo, genuinely. Like, it is really strong to be able to have your Oath of Druids get your Argothian. Like, if I had that Oath of Druids, I would be for sure playing this Gaia's Blessing, and I would be a sort of different deck with more green in it than I ended up being in. But it's amazing how just like one wheel differently kind of changes your whole build. Anthony, what did you learn?
I don't know. Take fixing higher. Don't make bad choices. You're gonna feel bad about them.
Yeah, I forgot even. Dang, you know what I forgot until Justin, you said that?
What's that?
I mentioned I took some unplayable card over. I took Fiery Temper over Temple Garden. Okay, real quick, just to correct myself and correct the record, I took Tradewind Rider over Temple Garden. I took Fiery Temper out of a pack with nothing even half on color for my deck. I even said in the episode where I was talking about the pack with Fiery Temper in it, if there had been a half on color fixing land, I would have taken it for sure over that Fiery Temper. But instead, I was blinded by the blueness of the Tradewind Rider and thought, I'm blue, I'll play blue cards, and did not fully recognize how unplayable that card was for me and how much a half on color fixing land might be great in the future.
Yeah.
When I had no green cards yet, but that was a sort of half on color card. Like, it's even reasonable if I didn't have any green cards, I might end up getting a certain number of fetches that would make me still want to play Temple Garden. That was a huge punt, because Temple Garden would have honestly, I mean, it's a worse card than Savannah, but it would have solved all my problems the same way that Savannah would have. And I literally have one red card in my sideboard, just Fiery Temper doing nothing. So I feel like that's a thing I know, but need to remind myself of in the draft. Is like, half on color fixing is certainly in like pack 1 should be a really high priority. Certainly higher than an unplayable card in a color that you don't expect to be playing, but also honestly higher than some other playable cards in some circumstances, because I have 7 on-color cards I'm not playing here.
Yeah, I mean, the other big question for me and sort of like my play ability here is I'm recognizing that I definitely have a hole in understanding a lot of those unique card relationships. And like, when I look at Arcanus and Mind Over Matter and Brain Geyser, like, yeah, I know how to play Magic, I can puzzle that together, but it's not front of mind. It's not like,
it doesn't,
yes, this
it
is
doesn't
not
shift your thinking so that you see Grim Monolith and are like,
right.
yes,
It doesn't jump
that's
out
the
off
last
the page,
piece, you know? Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, like, honestly, that is there's a real cost to putting in the effort to learning those interactions of just like play experience or doing research or watching other people play more, and you kind of got to gauge it, how much that's going to make the game more fun for you.
Yeah, for sure. All right. This episode ran a little long, but I had a really great time. I love these episodes. I think it's a really interesting perspective to talk about those nuanced decisions as a player that we so rarely get to discuss on the show. So let us know in the comments if you liked this kind of episode, if you never want to hear one of these ever again. If you do like this episode, what cube would you like us to do next if we are going to do this? One of our own cubes, or perhaps a cube of somebody else's for whom neither of us have that designer perspective, where we are perhaps seeing a little bit too deep through the matrix and thinking, wow, Yawgmoth's Will, stroke of genius, this could be a thing.
Yeah, and I will say also, it's probably an interesting experience. Obviously, you can like sit down on Arena or Magic Online and do a draft with someone together. I think doing the whole draft separately and then comparing what you did, because a lot of like effects are changes by things you took 2 packs ago. So I think it could be an interesting exercise if people want to. We'll put links in the show notes to Draftmancer where you could do this the same and like seed a draft identically for 2 players.
Yeah, for the nerds that want to know how we did this, I took the cube list, exported it from Cube Cobra, randomized it, and then Draftmancer allows you to upload pre-built booster packs. Presumably, if you're building like a custom set or a cube where you have very like careful rules for seeding packs, they let you just upload the actual booster packs. And so I just randomized it and then uploaded those booster packs. You have to put a line break between them, basically, which is a little bit of work, but I did that.
Work. You just have to know the one regular expression.
That is work. It is work to do that and know how that thing works. I'll have you know, you narrowly beat ChatGPT in accomplishing that task. I had just asked ChatGPT to do it, and you got there slightly before. So good job.
So you continued to interact with ChatGPT after?
Every once in a while.
Is that why you pinged me on that message so you could time me?
No, not so I could time you. I honestly didn't think to do it until after I had sent you. Look, there are some tasks it's good at, and this is an example of a thing where it's like I could know the regex, or I could just be like, hey, put a line break after every group of 15 of these cards, and it did a perfectly fine job.
You didn't ask it what the regular expression was. That makes more sense.
No, I gave it the list, and I said put a line break after every one of these things. That's the kind of automated stuff I think it can be good at, where you can give it clear instructions in English language, and it can translate them.
Just no regular expressions.
Sorry, I don't know better regular expressions. Yeah, so that's how we did it. So if you want to do this exercise for yourself, honestly, we'll put the randomized list of cards that we drafted here, which maybe we should say says the beginning of the episode, so it wouldn't be a spoiler. But if you want to do this exact draft, though, I guess maybe the bots probably change maybe somewhat regularly.
Possibly.
So I'm not sure how much that will actually stand up, but Either way, that's how we did it. And if you have a fellow Cube friend that is equally as obsessed with this weird format as you and is willing to do this, I think it is really eye-opening to spend this much time analyzing a draft. So recommend it for sure. On that bombshell, that is the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All of the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by Thinking Hard About Magic Cards and speaking into microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for doing a whole draft and talking about a ton of Magic cards and
hey, you suggested my Cube.
Mistakes.
Thank you for doing my Cube. I was so glad when you suggested it
Happy
because I love talking about Neoclassical Cube. We got to do one of yours next.
Okay. Unless listeners send in a better one.
We've done the regular Cube, I know. We also do Bun Magic Cube? Those are the two we've done?
Those are the two we've done.
Okay. So I guess it's Turbo Cube.
Turbo Cube.
You got to add Karn. Are you going to add Karn?
Yeah, I have a tab open. This is how I'm operating these days. Is I just have a tab open in my phone browser with Karn.
I have a couple tabs open in my phone browser too that are like, here's something I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
That's a great place to store it.
Yeah.
Really good.
Good strategy.
Really good organization.